If you're ready to harness the power of your communications data, blast off with Nylas today.
Hello, Ram.
Hi, Blag. How's it going?
I'm doing fine, thanks. You?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to jump in today and talk about today's topic.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I have never used Azure before, so
Okay.
for me, it's going to be a learning experience.
Awesome. Yeah, so let's talk about what we're going to do in today's video.
Mhm.
We're going to look at setting up your first app using Azure, and we'll talk about like what are the different steps to do this. So we'll look at setting up your application in Azure and as well testing out authentication. So authentication is one of those tricky topics when it comes to setting up your application. And we'll talk about how you can do that with Azure. And we're also going to use Nylas. So Nylas is a platform that you can use to connect to a user's account to get different pieces of communication data. And in this scenario, we're going to use the Nylas dashboard, which is an awesome tool for actually testing out integrations, such as connecting a user's account to their Outlook account, for example.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and we've also done some videos in the past on this, and it's going to lead up to videos in the future, but definitely check out our YouTube channel because we've done videos on setting up your Google app and authenticating a Google user, and we're going to do something very similar here using Azure.
Awesome.
And maybe let me just show an example of this in the wild before we jump in, and we can talk about why this is important as well as we go along. So let me share my screen. Okay. Let me just bring this over here. Okay, cool. So we're not going to jump too much into using this, but this has been on Twitter quite a bit recently in terms of the chat GPT. So what you can do is you can have a conversation with an actual chat bot, and there are examples below as well in terms of, oh, you can go through code and you can ask about, okay, why this code isn't working, for example. And I've been seeing this throughout my Twitter thread for this past week. But the one thing I wanted to point out is let's take a look at what the authentication flow looks like. So when we click on Try Chat GPT, it's going to take us to this screen. And we have two options. We can log in and sign up. So this is part of the authentication flow for using Chat GPT. And if we were to click on log in, for example, we're going to see a few options here. So you can actually log in using an email address, and you can also use Google, or you can use Microsoft.
Okay.
And the same is if we click sign up, you can create an account, and you can create an account using either Google or Microsoft. And to enable this functionality, you actually need to create an application within Google services and as well within the corresponding Azure services. So we're going to look at what we need to do to set up this flow where you can actually continue or connect a user's account using their Microsoft account.
Nice.
And this kind of leads us to the point, why is this important? Is so you can enable multiple connections and to be able to onboard different users very conveniently using their respective accounts. So if you have a Google account, you can jump in. Or if you have a Microsoft account or an Outlook account, you can jump in and start using any application using your account.
Yeah, that's pretty convenient. I mean, you don't need to fill a lot of fields or like remember a password to just click in and it's going to load you.
Yeah, totally. So let's go over to Azure. And another way of describing Azure is it is a cloud compute provider. So it's very similar to Google Cloud Provider or AWS, where you can essentially set up your infrastructure here. And as well, you can set up any services you want to use or any APIs that you want to connect to that are available in the Microsoft ecosystem. So the first thing we're actually going to do here is we're going to set up an application using an Azure application so we can set up all the different permissions that we need. And I'll talk about those permissions as we go along. So let's go to the Active Directory. So we're going to go to the Azure Active Directory. And here, we're actually going to first go to app registration. So this is where you can actually create an application. So I'm just going to zoom in a bit. So under app registrations, at the very top, we're going to click on New Registrations. And here, we're going to actually create our application. So we're going to enter in a few fields here. We'll first put in my first Azure app. And then from there, we're going to look at a few other fields that we need to input. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to select the type of application or the access. And there are a few options here, so you can do it whether you're an internal organization or you're going to be a public facing application. And there's also some options here to help you choose if you want to click through and go through any of the documentation available. In our use case, we're just going to use accounts in any organization, whether it be a business or as well personal. So we're going to look at connecting a personal account. And the next thing we need to do is, since we're going to be using Nylas for our authentication, so Nylas handles all your authentication for you as well, and it's called hosted authentication. So they will host your authentication flow for you. We need to configure this field so that we can actually use the hosted authentication setup. So we'll first select web. And the next thing that we need to put in here is we actually need to input the URL that we're going to use. And this is going to be the URL, the Nilas' URL, for any time we authenticate a user. So this information is also available inside of our docs. So if we go to our docs as well, you can go to the basics section and walk through authentication. So this will kind of tell you all the different steps and go over what we're talking about today. And it'll also provide the URLs that you need to provide to these different service providers. So this is the flow that we're going to be building out. We're going to be creating an application. We're going to be setting up Microsoft, so we can use Microsoft to allow a user to sign in using Microsoft. So let's go back to registering your application. And here we're going to put in the URL api.nylas.com /OAuth/callback. So this is going to allow us to be able to authenticate a user and return the user back to our application. So let's go ahead and click register. And now that we've registered, we're going to need to do a few things. I just want to point out two pieces of information before we go ahead. Is we're going to need the application ID, and we're going to need to add this to our Nylas dashboard. So we'll come back to this in a second. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to set up API permissions. So anytime we want to be able to communicate to Microsoft or Google, we need to set up the permissions that we're going to need.
Yes.
So here for now, we have user.read, and we're going to add a few more to this. So the ones we're going to add here are going to be OpenID and the user's profile. So we can go add permission. And inside add permission, since we're using a connected account or we're connecting to a user's account, we're going to be using the Microsoft Graph API. So the Microsoft Graph is the name of Microsoft's API that allows you to access all different information available for the user, whether it be their Outlook account or any of their Office documentation or even their calendar. So this is their RESTful API that you can use to access any information on a user. So we need to set up 3 different permissions. And the first thing we need to do is we need to decide if we're going to use delegated permissions or application permissions. And again, Microsoft provides a good overview of what these mean. So I'm just in the Microsoft documentation, and they describe delegated as the application accessing information on the user's behalf. So this may be useful in some cases. In most cases, when we're building our application, we're going to want to access the information as the application. So if we want to access their calendar information, we would do it as app-only access. There are some things we would need to do under delegated access, and I'm going to show you those right now in terms of reading user information, for example. So here under delegated permissions, we need to add a few things under OpenID. So this is when a user signs in, we need to add this. And you can click on the information icon to see what's being described here. So this allows the user to sign into your app and allows the app to see basic information about the user. So we need to add the OpenID and the profile permissions to our application. So let's go ahead and add these. And as well, we're going to add another permission, which we won't necessarily look at in this video, but let's take a look at adding a permission to access a user's calendar. So what would that look like? So here we would go to Microsoft Graph, and we're going to go for application permissions. And inside here in the search, let's just type out calendar. So under calendars, we're going to need the read permission. So this will allow us to actually read all of the available calendars for a user that is signed in. And this is our application that will be able to request this information without the user being involved.
Okay, perfect.
So we're going to add this permission as well.
Mm-hmm.
So now we've gone ahead and added different permissions here. So we have the calendars.read, we have OpenID, profile, and user.read. So this was added automatically. We're going to go ahead and look at setting up the actual certificates and tokens that we're going to need to communicate with the Microsoft Graph API.
Cool.
So this is important when Nylas or your application needs to communicate with the Graph API. You're going to need to set up tokens.
Mm-hmm.
So over here on the certificates and secrets, we're going to create a new client. And under the new client, we're going to add a description. So I'm going to write my first Azure app as the client secret. And for now, for the expiration, I'm going to choose 24 months. So you can decide when you want the secret to expire.
Okay.
And the reason they're asking this is for security purposes. If you ever want to refresh your client more frequently, this is useful to decide at what frequency you want to be updating your secrets for your application.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and add this. And now we see here that we have a value and a secret ID. So the other piece of information we need to add to our Nylas dashboard is the secret ID. So this is the information we're going to copy over. And one thing we recommend is to store your secrets more securely. I know we're showing our secret on the screen, and this may not be available afterwards. But again, this is the information we're going to take over to Nylas. So we've kind of done everything we needed in terms of setting up our first Azure application. And we're going to grab over two pieces of information. One is going to be the application itself, and as well the secret ID. So let's go over to Nylas next. So we're going to go to nylas.com. We're going to log in. And inside of Nylas, we're going to look at creating an application. And we're just going to write my first Azure app, and we're just going to test out creating that actual authentication flow.
Mm-hmm.
So here we're going to be using API as our application, and we're developing for web, and we can go ahead and create our application. So now that we've done that, we actually want to look at connecting an email account. And that was the initial reason for doing this live stream, is so we can create an Azure application and connect an email account.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to do that, we need to go to the app settings. And in the app settings, we need to select authentication. So we can add all of the Microsoft Graph information right here. So here we need to add the client ID and the client secret. So let's grab that information from Azure. So we're going to grab the secret ID.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to drop it right here, the secret. And we need to get the application. So this is your client ID or your application ID. And we're going to go back up one level to, let's go to the app registrations. And here we have the different applications. So we're going to select the application. And here is the actual application or client ID. So let's copy this over. So let's copy this over and let's go save Office 365 settings. So now we've saved all the information we needed in Nylas. And now we can actually use Nylas dashboard or use the Nylas dashboard to connect an account to make sure the integration is working. So let's go to the dashboard and let's click on connect an account. So from here, you can connect any account that you've set up a service provider for, you've set up the application for, whether it be Google or Azure. So let's take a look at doing that. I'm just going to grab an account.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to connect an account. And for now, since we've only set up email permissions, I'm going to only select, actually, we've only set up calendar permissions. So I'm only going to select calendar read only for now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to enter in the email address. And just to kind of take a step back, this would be similar to the authentication flow that you'd be setting up within your application. It just here you can test it all out within Nylas. And then once you do that, you'll have access to the user's information and as well all of their calendars. So you can go through and grab all their calendar events.
And I guess that would work for Outlook and Hotmail and everything that it's related to, right?
Yeah, so every Microsoft account you'd be able to access since we set up the application to access personal accounts as well.
Perfect.
So let's go ahead and connect. And this is very similar to what you would see when you set up hosted authentication or use hosted authentication within your application. It's all built for you using Nylas.
Mm-hmm.
So let me go ahead and copy the password and let's go ahead and log in. And if everything works, you should be sent back to the Nylas dashboard since we set up the Nylas callback within Azure, and you see that you have the access token and you actually have the account, and you can see that it's running. So the account's been connected and everything is working as expected.
Pretty cool. That's nice. So you have type of account, provider.
Yeah, so that was a walkthrough setting up an Azure application and connecting a user's account using Nylas. And I know this is more of a building block. It's like, what would I do with this next? Now you can start actually grabbing user information and showing calendars. So I think in an upcoming video, what would be great is if we can actually connect multiple accounts, so maybe a Google account, an Outlook account, and then say, okay, I want to show all the calendar events in one calendar.
That's pretty nice. That's pretty interesting. And it's cool. I mean, I have done obviously the Google integration. So Azure looks kind of different, but in the end, it's not that hard, right? It's just following certain steps and then you have it configured and you can just access wherever you want, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting to go through the different permit or the different application creations to see how they're different and how they're the same. And it's also great afterwards, like once you've set up these applications, then you're getting the same data back from Nylas for each one of them. So all the data is normalized in one format. So you can grab all the information and start using it within your application to build really cool features when it comes to using communication data.
Yeah, in the end, doesn't matter which provider you're using, you're just getting the information. So it's all transparent for the end user.
Yep. Yeah, I think a few other things I wanted to mention is definitely check out our blog. We've had some great content coming out on using Fig, email threads recently, and as well, I think we have a blog post now on just what we went through today in terms of using Azure and setting up your account. And as well, definitely check out our Twitter handle. Like we have a lot of content coming out on Twitter. Our team's been doing a great job there, posting content on upcoming and relevant information to all things communication data.
Yep. And you just don't forget to go to our GitHub, Nylas samples, where you're going to find a lot of code samples of everything that we do on live streams or blog posts.
Awesome.
Yep. Thank you, Ram. That was great. I mean, I'm pretty sure a lot of people have learned how to use Azure that they have probably never used it before. So thank you so much. It was great.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks, everyone. See you.
Thanks. Bye. Take care.